Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Vince Duvall with Eagle Homes, powered by eXp Realty. Today, we're going to be talking about home inspections and the appraisal process.
I'm Brad Brewer. I'm also with Eagle Homes, powered by eXp as well.
I'm Adam Zeman. I'm the lender, Adam Zeman Mortgage Team, or AZ Mortgage Team.
Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to start with the home inspection. That typically is, one of the first things that we start to do besides working with the lender prior to, putting in that offer. Once we get an offer in, escrow money, we talked a little bit about last week, and then getting that home inspection. So, Brad, let's talk a little bit about home inspection, how the process goes, the steps, and what happens if a home if things come up on the home inspection.
Absolutely. So home inspection is a very common thing that should be a contingency for buyers in your offer. So the first thing after we get an accepted offer, after sending out your earnest money check, is we will give you, if you have an inspector that you know of, that family friend, just someone you know from a previous experience, more than welcome to use them. Otherwise, if you would like a recommendation, we always recommend 3 inspectors. Our reason for doing this is just like your agent. We want to make sure you have a good rapport, a good, comfortable feeling with that inspector. Their processes, of course, pricing. They're all priced fairly similar. And so we let you make that choice. Once the choice is made, we actually then work with the inspector based on their conversation with you on getting that scheduled and getting the schedule done in the home to have that inspection completed. Key things that you're looking for during the inspection really are safety defects, especially in this market. We're still in a seller's market and probably plan to be. So it's really hard to get away with trying to ask for a lot of silly stuff. Silly stuff, as I just call it there, would more be referred to in a technical term as normal wear and tear on a home. Frayed trim, scratches on the floor. That is wear and tear from people obviously living in the home. So we're going to stay away from those. Safety defects are pretty well self-described, the things that could be a safety concern. Windows that can't open so you can't escape during a fire, electrical, plumbing, anything with plumbing that could cause water concerns, foundational issues, structural issues with roofing, things like that. A lot of what could potentially end up being for the buyer is a big ticket item. And I know once we get to appraisal with Adam, he'll explain how these things also tie in with the inspection stuff to appraisals. But that's really what we're looking for. So once the inspector's gone and identified these things, one of 2 things will happen. If it's a clear defect that's obvious, we can take the inspector's word. A lot of inspectors, because their general knowledge on a lot of this stuff, they're not always experts in electric and all those things. They may defer it and ask at that point for a specialist to come in and verify and confirm that this is a problem. So we're going to take all those things into consideration. We're going to get that specialist in if need. And then once we reviewed everything, to get the seller to agree to make the repairs is one avenue. The other avenue is there could be like a credit provided, a price reduction if you, the buyer, says, you know what, I'll take care of this stuff, but I just want to be compensated for it in some form or fashion monetarily. So that's pretty much the process to do it. Once the amendment's done, we say the seller is going to be responsible for repairs. The amendment's drafted, outlines the repairs. We usually ask for paid receipts and lien waivers if the repairs are actually completed before closing. There are instances where things could be done technically after closing, but I'm going to let Vince ask that question because I know he will. And I'll explain that further. But normally, you're going to do the amendment, and we're going to ask that the repairs are done 3 days prior to closing. That way, during our final walkthrough, we can verify it visually. But then we've got all the paid receipts, lien waivers, so that we know that there's no additional debts that the seller incurred on the property for these repairs. And
so, Brad, I'm going to interrupt you. Kind of backing up a little bit. Talked about contingencies. What's a contingency? Not everybody knows what a contingency is, and I think to help people understand what a contingency is. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, excellent question. A contingency is simply, it almost defines itself. When you make an offer, your offer, most cases, has various types of contingency. It means I'm going to buy this home for X amount, contingent upon the following things being verified. Inspection is one, appraisal is another one. And then if you're the buyer, you're getting a loan, actual completion of the process of the loan approval that you can actually get financing to buy the home. There's some other ones that can pop up here and there when there's associations involved for condos and HOAs and stuff like that. Well and septic inspections. There's other ones that can pop up. Those are the really common ones that you're going to see. And then that's one of the protections when we reference back to earnest money, because if you as the buyer, one of the contingencies is not filled, whether it's on your end on the loan side, or you can't come to agreement on repairs from the inspection, that's how you get your earnest money back, because one of those contingencies was not filled. So that's the out to the contract. Seller puts the home back on the market. You go on your way and look for another home. So that's essentially a contingency.
How long does the inspection usually take? Are we talking a couple hours, 6 to 8 hours? Should my inspector climb on the roof? I mean, what's the expectations if I'm there with the inspector?
Sure. Inspector is limited. Inspector cannot dig in and start opening up walls and things like it. It is very much a visual, but they are going to get into spaces. If the home is a crawl space, they're going to get in the crawl space typically. They're going to go up on the roof and visually inspect the roof. They're going to go in the attics. They are going to visually inspect as much as they can get to. And you'll see notes on inspection forms, like when you have finished basements, they can't see maybe any of the actual foundational walls. They're going to note that, they're going to make comments from what I can see, or I can't see this. Even things like seasonally during the wintertime, they can't test the air conditioner. So they're going to make that note that due to weather, I'm able to test the air conditioning. So, but it's still a visual inspection, but they're going to go way deeper than, you, the buyer, or us as the agent, just simply walking through the home. Because I don't think I've ever climbed up in an attic.
Yeah, and I barely get into a crawl space. I'm not a big fan of spiders, so yeah. So when so home inspection, one thing I did ask, how long does it typically take?
Sure. Yes. And if you take let's take a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,800 square foot home, probably 2.5 to 3 hours.
Okay.
Depending on the inspector, their experience, their proficiency, again, what things they can get access to. I would expect somewhere between 2.5 to 3 hours. Your larger homes, they can be 4 hours.
Right.
That will, by the way, dictate price too, because they usually based on price, are there outbuildings, things like that. So the more structures there are to inspect, the longer it's going to take. But I go 2 to 3 hours on as far as probably an average.
Gotcha. I had another question for you. Talked about the repairs and doing repairs afterwards or whatnot. How's that work? Let's say the house needs a new roof. I can't get in today's market. We can't get roofers out, plumbers out in a sometimes in a 30-day fashion. How do we get that still repaired so we can move forward with the deal?
Great question. I knew you would ask it. So let's use the example of the roof. You're right. Sometimes, if we're 3 weeks to closing and all of a sudden we find out it needs a new roof. Now, and then I'll let Adam, they'll have some continuation on this depending on the different types of loans. As long as the loan allows and all both parties agree, what would typically happen is that we would get the quote on the roof. If it comes in at $15,000, sellers agreed to pay for it. And this is where some of the lending laws or requirements come into play, is the seller at the time of closing would put that money into an escrow held typically by the title company. And the lender will typically require, usually pretty common, is 1.5 times the amount. Okay. So if it's $15,000, quick math would be the title company is going to hold from the seller's proceeds of the property, or just hold the seller where the money comes from, hold the seller's funds in the amount of 22,500, and they're going to hold that funds until the repairs are done. Then the roofer, upon their scheduled, and there are time restrictions are typically put on this. Once the repair is done, then the roofer, who's ever hired to do the roof, then submits their invoice to the title company. Title company then cuts their check. If there's money left over, which that's why they do the 1.5 times, the excess money, the title company then cuts that return excess dollar amount check and mails it to the seller, or has them pick it up if they're local.
Adam, let me ask you a question based on that information. Is there a dollar value? So if it's a, $200,000 home, is there a max dollar value that we can talk about escrowing for repairs, or is it kind of like Brad said, based on loans and things like that?
Yes and no. So escrow holdbacks are a little convoluted. So, and what do I mean by that? Some lenders don't even necessarily want to deal with them because it's an after closing headache that could prevent them from a saleable loan, and that's a whole nother deep conversation. So as a rule, an escrow holdback is something that can be completed if it's for a legitimate reason. We live in Wisconsin, so obviously you're not doing paint outside and the exterior, maybe roof stuff, basically anything outside due to weather, or it just typically has to make sense. Now, I don't know that I've ever done one because the seller was like, we can't get a roofer out there in time. Usually that's something that's put together between both parties where maybe there's a reduction in price, or actually I just had one like that where it literally was just a reduction in price. They're going to complete the roof afterwards, or they work something out that's kind of outside of the scope of lending, where something that doesn't necessarily need me to be involved. So that's kind of been my experience with escrow holdbacks. It's typically, especially in this state, it's usually weather related, where something where we just can't get someone out there to do that work. Now, that doesn't mean that you give me a good case where you're like, hey man, I can't get a roofer out here because it's COVID and it's going to take 2 months. That's something we're going to do.
Right.
I just got to pitch it. It's got to be something where it's got to make sense. But I've seen most escrow repairs are going to be typically like roof issues or painting for FHA or something along those lines. That's never, it's typically not a big, something that's, it's typically something that's going to prevent that loan from going through. That's why we're going to hold back the money. Again, like a roof that's decaying or whatever they might be.
Gotcha.
Or septic.
Yeah.
Seen that.
Okay. Yeah. Septic's a big one here in Wisconsin. We got being out in the county, a lot of septic and holding tanks. So yeah, I can see that. What about, hey, Brad, as an agent, do you typically review the home inspection with the buyers? Do you go through it line by line with them and make recommendations, or do you kind of just point out kind of the obvious and talk about, what that means in a home inspection?
Yes, I do. Couple things. So as far as reviewing it, I've seen inspectors go through it with these buyers as well, which I do like, because the way inspectors word certain things can sometimes, I'll be honest, look a little scarier or look worse than it really is.
Right.
And I do appreciate when an inspector does take the time, and the ones that we recommend do these things is they'll actually have the conversation first, like, hey, I found this is what this really means. This is really a big deal that probably should be checked out, or hey, this is not that bad. So I'd like that. And then I'll usually review, and if I have any questions, I've seen enough in my career that I don't always need to have a conversation myself with the inspector, but sometimes I'll get a verification like, hey, is this really this? Then I schedule time to go through with the seller, or excuse me, with the buyer, and I will make recommendations on the guideline of, and I set the expectations. Hey, we are looking for safety defects. It's just, again, referencing the market. You can sometimes, if it's we shift into a buyer's market, there's some negotiation that can be done there on some things that are less. But to be fair to all parties, we really try and stick around safety defects. I go through those, what those are, what the proper, request would be to have those repaired. And again, just like on an offer, hey, how much you want to offer? I recommend this. I'm giving my consultation, I'm giving my guidance, and then just looking for my buyer to say, yes, I'm comfortable with that. Thank you for the explanation. And then answering other questions, of course.
Okay. Well, one last question, then we're gonna get into appraisals and that process. Brad, do you ever recommend not doing a home inspection?
Never.
Okay. Just to make it clear, we never recommend it. It helps protect our buyers and gives them a peace of mind of what repairs need to be done today versus down the road,
Right.
and so forth. So,
I'm going to clarify, Vince, though.
Okay.
You will never hear out of our mouth, I don't recommend getting a home inspection. Have I had clients say, we're comfortable, we're going to not get one? Absolutely.
Right. Yep.
And I make it very clear that is their choice. But we'll never not recommend it because it's another verification. Now, some that I'm less, pushy on, if you will, to get them to do it. I've seen where condos, especially, when they're multi-unit building condos, the association is responsible for the exterior. So it's like, okay, unless you have some major concerns or questions on the interior, which is your responsibility, we're going to get enough information on the structure and stuff like that from the association documents and assessment possibilities that, all right, I'm a little less pushy there if you're comfortable, but on a regular home, but in general, I'm going to go back to the words, never, ever, ever will we not recommend a home inspection. So
awesome. So Adam, let's go into appraisals. Let's talk about the appraisal process, what it means and how that all plays out for our buyers.
All right. Always a fun topic. All right. So to start out with, the difference between an appraisal and an inspection. An inspection is something that you do for yourself, and you don't have to do that for a loan. Okay. Now, back to both of your points, you definitely should do an inspection if you're going to purchase a home. It's just a very good idea. I personally don't think I would purchase a home without an inspection. That's just me. But the appraisal is something you have to do if you're going to loan money. And the reason is it's kind of like your collateral in a way. It's saying this is what the house is worth. Now, last 18 months, we just went through craziness where people were paying over asking and over appraised values. But typically, people pay whatever that appraised value is. And typically, if the listing agent's done their job, the appraisal is going to come in at or maybe even slightly above whatever the appraised value is. So how does that appraiser go ahead and derive that value? So they're going to go and, unlike a home inspection, they're going to go in, but they're not going to go and do as much as a deep dive as like a home inspector will. A home inspector is going to get, again, it's for you. The home inspector is like they're there to make sure that house is good and there's no major defects. Where an appraiser is doing that, also making sure there's no major defects, but that depends on the loan program. So they're going to go into your house, typically without, the buyer. That's going to be something where they're going to just have the listing agent there. They're going to take pictures. They're going to look for certain things depending on the loan program. For a conventional loan, they're just going to look for maybe if there's huge structural issues, or usually like if the roof is fine, quote unquote, within 5 years, that it's going to be there. So conventionally, that's what they're looking for. FHA, they're looking for health hazards, paint peeling, or like wires sticking out of the wall, or correct outlets. So not to go too far into detail about that, because I think that's a little confusing for people. That's just the difference in like how the appraisals are put together from the get-go. So him or her is going to go in the house. They're going to take pictures. They're going to take pictures of the interior. They're going to take pictures of the exterior. They may go in the attic depending on what loan program it is, but they're not going to go super deep into that home. Then they're going to go back to their office and they're going to take a look at the recent comparable sales. So what they're looking at is the most recent sales comparable to your house that are closest to your house. Okay. So if your neighbor just, four neighbors just sold a home that is like yours, they're going to use those sales. And they're going to take a look and they're going to make adjustments to those comps. What does that mean? Your neighbor might have a pool and you don't. So they're making an adjustment on that comp to adjust for the fact that that value might be different based on the fact that they have a pool, or they might have a home that is more up to date versus the home you're purchasing might be less up to date, or they might have an extra bathroom or whatever. There's adjustments made to the appraisal typically, to the comps, I should say. So they're going to take those comps and they're going to take the offer to purchase that we provide them, and that's how they're going to derive the value. So when you purchase a home, that appraiser does have the value. They have the offer to purchase, so they know what value we're kind of thinking of to start out with. I think that's huge. They don't have that when you do a refinance, so that's why values can come in quite a bit lower when you refinance versus purchasing, because they don't have a baseline as to what the value, what you're thinking at least. Then they put together the whole appraisal, which is typically, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 pages of pictures of the home that you're going to purchase, and then the pictures of the comps, and then the adjustments that they made. And we use there's an income appraisal. Like if you look at an appraisal, there's two different values that they give. We use the one, I guess I forget the term off the top of my head, but it's the term that all lenders use, that shows you what that value is going to be. And they also will notate things on that appraisal, like, do we need repairs on that home? You know, they'll put it as is, quote unquote, a check mark, or subject to, and the subject to will be any repairs. And that usually is repairs you need to make for usually FHA loans, but for conventional, it could be structural issues. So that's kind of how, I mean, that's a really broad stroke on like what an appraisal is and what that looks like. But essentially, we need to know, is that house worth what you're paying for it? Because you can't loan more than what it's worth. For instance, you purchased a home for $200,000 and the appraisal comes in at $195,000. Well, that's up to, you know, Brad or Vince to negotiate to a lower price, and or you need to come up with the difference between those values. So that's really telling us, like, what is this property worth without the agents involved, you know, without the seller's agent just saying, like, I think it's worth this. We need something to determine what it's actually worth. What else?
A couple questions for you, Adam.
Yeah.
So when an appraiser comes in, do they measure room sizes, or are they just kind of trusting it off the MLS? Because, you know, a great example, I'm dealing with one currently that MLS has it listed at 1,100. Tax records show it at like 750. You know, we personally haven't measured room size, and that's our job as agents to, you know, verify room sizes. But do appraisers come in and, you know, measure the room sizes to verify that, you know, that square footage is pretty accurate, or are they just measuring the outside of the house and if it's a 2-story, multiplying it by 2?
I've seen it both ways, to be very honest. So personally, last appraisal I did on a property, he actually measured it. I think that they can go off of like the MLS or the tax records. You also have the ability as the agent to, if you're there, which you should be, is to say, hey, you know, I think there's a little difference in what we're coming up with. Is there any way you can measure that for me? And I would say 9 times out of 10, appraisers are super cool. And if I was a listing agent, and this necessarily wasn't applicable in the last 2 years, but it was prior to that, I would come with my comps and I would show them, like, this is what I'm thinking, and here's why I'm thinking that. Because if you have a good case, they're going to listen to you, and they're going to at least have it in their head, like, what your thought process was.
Gotcha.
Go ahead.
You also mentioned appraisers will take into consideration the finishing. So we're talking about stainless steel appliances or granite countertops versus Formica, things like that. Fully carpeted house versus hardwood floors or tile versus laminate. So they take all that in consideration. Do they get that from other appraisals? Is there like a database, like what we have as agents? We have a database of MLS listings and kind of that we can do comparables. Are they using something similar to get those comparables?
Yes, they are. There is an actual database, and it started to become a bigger database as of like 8 years ago.
Okay.
So there's like a national database, and not to go too far into detail for values, but there is something like if they're too far off with their value, like it will cause something in the system to say like bing bing bing, like I don't like you're too far off. And that's the sometimes you could purchase a house and not do an appraisal, so I don't want to go too deep into that, but
yeah.
When we run the automated underwriting findings, it will actually say, like, typically if you're putting 10 or 20% down, it will say, hey, this is good because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac has this database that they've been creating for 8-10 years. And the numbers or the algorithms will run and say, well, hey, that value that's good. We're solid. You don't need to do an appraisal. You
Gotcha.
can now then choose to do an appraisal or not to do an appraisal as a consumer, but the loan says you don't have to do it. Okay. That happens more when you're doing more percentage downs for whatever reason.
Gotcha. What about how, typically how long does it take to get an appraisal, to get the data back from the appraisal? And then what happens with that information?
So, and I'm not going to speak for other lenders because I've heard stories recently. I heard a story where the appraisal contingency was up and they had just ordered it like 2 days prior.
Ooh.
So they didn't order it for 25 days or so. But for me, I got an offer to purchase yesterday. We ordered the appraisal today. My expectation is to have it back less than 10 days, but I'm thinking I'll have it back in that 7-day period. That really depends on where your appraisal is. If you're in the Waukesha County, Racine County, Milwaukee County, sort of that southeastern Wisconsin, there's going to be more appraisers to go out and do that work. We have a panel of people that we've created. So people we can trust to go out and do that work in a timely fashion. Where it becomes a lot more interesting is if you're in like northern counties, there's less appraisers and they just typically have a different work attitude towards work. I'm not kidding where I've had some where it was like Johnny's going to be hunting for 10 days because it was gun hunting. Like, okay, that legitimately did happen. Okay, so if you're in southeastern Wisconsin, I think it's very reasonable to expect your appraisal to come back less than 10 days from the date that you ordered it. If you're up north, you could be 20. I mean, you could be 30 days. Like that's the difference. So
Adam, trying to get a plumber during hunting season. I mean, what are you talking about?
Yeah, anything. It's like it's impossible. So you have to look at where you are. There are differences and all that as far as what your expectation is for the appraisal turn time.
It's like trying to have an open house during a Packers game.
That's right. Hey, I've done pretty well with those actually.
Adam, you mentioned appraisers have data. They have what your purchase price is or what the list price is to kind of give them a base on when they're appraising the house, but they don't have something like that when they're refinancing. Do we see, in your opinion, do you foresee issues in the future because homes today have been going well over, value, which then drives appraisal values up? Do we see it when we go to refinance and, if someone goes to refinance when interest rates start to come back down, them not be able to get a hit appraised value?
Yeah, that's something that's always kind of happened. So what I recommend to, the consumer is when you have an appraiser show up to your house, kind of tell them what you're thinking for the value. Go as far as to say, hey, the lender said it was worth this. I don't want to bother you. I'm not trying to tell you what your job is. I'm just trying to tell you what I was thinking as far as the value goes. Get out of their way, let them do the appraisal. I guarantee you he's going to remember that number and at least have that in him or her head when they do that appraisal versus just blindly coming up with like a number. So I think that's important. I don't think a lot of people do that. I think that's something you should always do. Again, don't poke the bear, don't bother them, just kind of tell them what you're thinking and let them do their job.
Yep. Yeah. Wonderful.
I think for purchases, that could be kind of an interesting in the next year where agents might still think for certain homes that they're going to get a value that's far above what it should be. I could see that being an issue for maybe that $300,000-$400,000 purchase price. I don't know. I start to see that a little bit. I think you're going to see a little bit more of that, and then the appraisal is going to come in lower. And nowadays, people aren't willing to bring the extra money, and then now it's a negotiation between agents, and it just becomes a different thing, you know?
Right. All right. So, are we starting to see appraisals and list price starting to come closer together? I know I've done a few deals where actually homes have appraised for $5,000 to $10,000 over offer price, and it was kind of a surprise. So do you think we'll start seeing appraisals starting to come back down to reality?
I think so. And to your point, like I would say 70% of the appraisals that I've gotten recently, and again, it's a lot slower for everybody, so it's not like I'm doing 100 appraisals a month. Those usually come in a little higher.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. That offers up a negotiation tactic for you guys, for people maybe to up the offer price and get a concession towards closing costs. And why that's important nowadays is because rates are so wonky and out of whack that you're usually typically paying some sort of point, whether it be a quarter or half a point for an interest rate,
right.
Especially if you have a lower credit score, you're paying a lot more. So if you can have the value go up and get a seller concession, that helps that consumer bringing in less money to the closing.
Yeah. No, awesome. Well, good talk today. Adam, is there anything else you want to cover with appraisals, or?
That's it. I think that's it. I mean, it's a topic that you can go on and on and on and on for, because there's even more that goes into it. But like really, at the sum of it is it's just how we derive the value, which is derived by the most recent comparable sales closest to your home. That's how we're looking at. That's how they're looking at that. And again, they have the offer to purchase to go off of.
One last question. I know we've covered it in previous weeks. When an appraisal comes back, how do you communicate value, non-value to a buyer? Do they get to see that appraisal, or is it just kind of a letter saying, hey, congratulations, we hit value, or no, we didn't hit value?
So the appraisal goes to the consumer automatically. And then that's a conversation I have and reach out to them. Either myself or one of my team members is going to say, hey, we're good with value, or if we're not good with value, then that's something they're going to bring up to that person. And that's something we're going to bring up to the buyer's agent, not the selling agent, the buyer's agent. And we're going to have a conversation about where that value is and what the next step is. Are they walking from the deal? Is it really far off? Or are you going to negotiate lower, or What does that look like?
Yeah. Awesome. Good conversation today. Appreciate your time, Adam. I know Brad had to jump off because he had another call. So once again, we do this every week on Wednesday mornings. Everybody, please join us for a Q&A. If you have questions, put it in the chat box or email us. We'd love to cover it. Thanks again for everyone's time. Adam, we'll talk to you later.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.